Each week, the teaching pastors of City Rise Church gather to discuss the theology, history, and key points of the scripture focus for the upcoming sermon. We hope sharing these discussions with you will help you go deeper in the Word as our leaders process together what God wants to communicate to our church family. Check out cityrise.org/live to enjoy the upcoming sermon live stream or to watch any of our most recent messages. If you find this resource helpful to you, please like and share this sermon conversation.
All right, guys. So Revelation 14 coming up this Sunday. Now, did any of us preach this past Sunday? I did not. Mark, I know you were.
I preached in Warsaw.
You preached
It was
in
not
Poland.
out of Revelation.
You did not preach Revelation 13?
Nope, I did not.
You didn't choose the Antichrist as your text for your churches in Poland?
I will build my church.
Hey, that's exciting. So did you preach last Sunday?
I did.
Okay, talk to us about how you felt about chapter 13. How did it resonate with the folks?
It was for some reason the Spanish-speaking congregation is very interested in.
Did you have high attendance?
Our attendance was a little lower, but the interest is just they're glued to the presentation, which is good. I don't know why that is so. Some people are obviously, I'm going to say, mature Christians. They've been exposed to this material maybe some way, somehow, in some, and then some other ones are fairly new, but they're very much interested in what
they want to figure out what's this all about.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it's just this Hispanic culture. Roger even gave that Spurgeon quote. It's like a lot of people will show up to hear something about Jesus. A lot of people will show up to hear something about the Antichrist. Right. So I think it's pretty universal that people's interests are piqued when you start talking about prophecy and so forth. Yeah. Of course, everybody wants to know who is the Antichrist.
Right.
Speculate about that.
They want you to be able to say this is the Antichrist. And some people, we know, some people have their theories, and we went through about how multifaceted this person can be. It can be a government, can be a person, can be a system, somebody in the past, somebody in the present. So. But that is what they really want to know. And even the younger folks, teenagers who are, they probably, and I don't know if it's because of the movies that have been come out and they've shown
a lot of movies. Roger said there was 27 movies about the Antichrist.
Right.
Wow. Yeah.
Right. And so that may be what is piquing their interest.
Maybe, yeah.
Could be. Yeah. I'm 0 for 27, just to be.
You're so. You haven't watched a single one?
No.
It's probably good. Yeah, we probably should not be learning our eschatology from Hollywood, movies.
I think so.
Okay, well, on to chapter 14 this week. So I'm up here at Westview. Roger's at Bel Air this week. You guys are out in Missouri City.
Right. English
and Spanish. So here we go. I've been kind of marinating on this one for a couple of weeks now, and got up early this morning and kind of started to try to get some of my thoughts on paper. So we're titling this sermon, A Song and a Sickle. And, just kind of some wordplay there, and it comes straight out of the text. Although it's really, it's kind of a 3-point outline, but that doesn't work well with the title. So Song and a Sickle. So I think the way I'm going to start, I really want to I'm going to spend a fair amount of time at the beginning just trying to help people continue to understand how we approach the book of Revelation. So one thing I'm trying to drive home every time I have the opportunity is that this is secondary doctrine. Nobody should be saying, I've got a slam dunk on how all this goes down. Like I figured it out. And so I'm going to kind of drive that point home. I'm going to point to this Relevant magazine article where it talks about 7 times in, somewhat fairly recent history where Christians predicted the rapture and were wrong. And of course, all the way up, I didn't really realize people were talking about this, but apparently some people thought the eclipse, that happened recently was going to be trigger the rapture or something. Yeah. And so there's a lot of thoughts about, every time people try to say, oh, I know when it's going to be, or I know how this is going to happen. And this means this. they turn out to be wrong. And so the point I'm making there, which I think is just a great place to start, is look, the tighter you think you have it all figured out, the more loosely you need to hold those ideas in your hand. Yeah. Because the reality is that with this type of literature, it's much more descriptive than prescriptive, right? So that's kind of where I'm going to start, and then recap a little bit, talk about, chapters 12 and 13. We had that cosmic Christmas story.
Right.
And then really, I think the language that most of the teaching pastors have used the last 2 weeks has been really helpful with this idea of the counterfeit trinity or the false trinity, the satanic trinity. You have the dragon and the two beasts. Of course, you have the devil, the antichrist, and the false prophet, right? And so we've kind of gotten like a character sketch for the face of evil over the last 2 weeks. Very, very thorough. And kind of the takeaway message of that is, there's this coming, showdown, this coming final battle. And, we want to be on the side of truth and gospel, and we want to have our names written in the book of life. And then before I dig into 14, I listened to Danny's sermon that he did to the camera last week, and he did a little bit of this kind of work, and I thought it was so good and so helpful, where he just spent a little bit of time explaining, a little bit about the type of literature and kind of how we approach it. And I think I want to spend some time trying to give people some tools for how to handle very difficult text, right? And of course, Mark, you've taught this, in Bible college. But I think, you get to these chapters we're in, right? And these are hard chapters. Yeah. I mean, I'm sitting in the pew last Sunday and I'm just thinking, that is a tough job to preach chapter 12, chapter 13, to get all of that info out, these are hard chapters.
Hard.
Yeah. And I think most believers, I know I've been this way a lot. Most believers struggle with feeling equipped to handle difficult text, right? Mm-hmm. And so they come to a difficult text and they kind of say, oh man, I'm never gonna. Have you guys experienced this? Do you think people struggle with like how to handle?
Oh yeah, I think a lot of them, what they want is, tell me what this means. And when we say, you know what, this isn't clear. This could mean this.
Yeah, that's not satisfying.
Right. They're like, well, just tell me. It's not that we're holding something back.
Yeah. And, and we want people to be able to wrestle with a hard text for themselves as well. What we're going to add.
Yeah, I was going to say, I remind people frequently about as we were studying Revelation, that is the case, and that we don't understand a lot of it. It's a lot of symbolisms, and we just don't have a clear picture of everything. And I think that is intentionally so. That's the way God wanted it to be.
So it was written. Yeah,
that's the way it was written. Yeah. And so we wrestle with it also, and even the theologians, we go back and read from credible theologians, and they themselves will tell you.
They disagree with each other.
They disagree. Some of them disagree with each other, and they'll say, we're wrestling with this also. We don't have it down. It's not clear to us either. So,
and what, I don't want to chase the rabbit trail here because it's a whole nother thing, but what's very interesting about that is that the further we go in church history, there's actually less consensus on an interpretation, up until, probably, what is it, Mark, closer to like 1900, like the late, 19th century, there was a pretty fair consensus on eschatology. Right. And then it kind of has gone a million directions since then. Okay. Yeah. So what I want to do is give the people some important hermeneutical principles. Like, okay, guys, if you come to a difficult passage in the Bible, and this would apply to Revelation, it would also apply to any other difficult passage. When you're trying to discern the meaning of this difficult passage, you're looking for four things. And you guys tell me if I'm missing one, but this is kind of the tool I've always used. You're looking for the literal, grammatical, historical, contextual meaning. Okay, what do we mean by that? Literal meaning we're starting with face value.
Right. We're
starting with the Bible says what it means and means what it says, right? That's where we start. However, number two, grammatical, what interpretive clues does the grammar deliver to us? And so this is really important with Revelation because the grammar itself screams at us to interpret most of this book metaphorically. Even last week, with the beast, right? Well, clearly this is metaphor, it's symbolism. You got, like all these horns, and you go back to chapter 4 and all the, the cosmic beings. And so there's even chapter 1, his hair is like wool and his eyes are like. So, in English class, they taught us that when you see the words like or as, what are we dealing with? We're dealing with metaphor and simile, right? Yeah. And so that's grammatical. We have to look for that. And then historical, what do we learn from history that helps us make sense of the passage? For example, Danny in his sermon, he talked about, from last week's text, he talked about Nero and the man of lawlessness, and kind of built the case that would have historically been seen by the original audience as Nero. And so certainly some of Revelation is partially fulfilled. There's no doubt that there's some partial preterism, of course, we call it. And then contextual, this is where, we say, look, the best way to interpret the Bible is with more Bible, right? Like, what's the context? What's before, what's after? And then where does this passage find its context in the greater, the greater message of redemptive history? And so, what does the Old Testament say, and so forth? And that is super important with Revelation, because most of this apocalyptic type vision language, comes from Daniel or Ezekiel or Isaiah or so forth. Yeah. And so literal, grammatical, historical, contextual. And so just trying to explain that to the people, like, this is how you approach any difficult text. So what do y'all think about that? Is that too seminary-esque for like Sunday morning pulpit, or do you think it's helpful?
Sweep. I would add under grammatical genre. It's possibly,
that's a part of grammatical,
right?
Genre.
Exactly, but to know that, the whole book is apocalyptic. Now the first 3 chapters, there's the historical reference. And,
so you have to approach it for what it is in its genre.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because even the grammar you look at differently than you would at Romans. Or something.
And then, this hermeneutic would bring us to a place where we're looking at so much of Revelation through the lens of metaphor. I think I want to stop, and you guys tell me if you think this is unnecessary, but I want to explain a little bit about what do we mean when we say something is metaphor as it relates to the Bible? Because I think there are people out there that have this idea that if I say something's metaphorical, you think I'm somehow dodging or trying to like water down or soft pedal the text. That's not true at all. So what I want to say is that when we say something is metaphorical in reference to the Bible, we do not mean that the message being conveyed is unreal or untrue. We do not mean it's fable.
Right.
Metaphor doesn't mean fable.
No.
Right.
Metaphor means something. It's a picture. It conveys an idea that is very real.
Yep.
That is very true. For example, if I told my wife, "Baby, I love you to the moon and back."
Yep.
Well, we all know we're not getting in a rocket ship and actually going to hold hands on the moon.
Exactly.
We all know this is metaphor, but does it mean my love for her is fairy tale? No, it means I really, really love her. Right. So I think we have to think about Revelation in that way. And I think we miss that, and the further we get, to kind of down in the weeds of trying to solve sort of every riddle, I think, we miss the big picture of like, there's an epic story that God is revealing through these. And I think I said it the last time I preached, I see what John is doing in chapters 6 to 18. Remember that his task was write what you see.
Right.
So these are visions, right? This again, it's descriptive, not prescriptive.
Yeah.
I don't think he's seeing something like a, like an event reel or a history reel being played out. It's more like, here's the idea of what's coming, of what's
and he's
occurring.
seeing things that have never been seen. So it doesn't even have a category. I mean, if I see an animal I've seen in a zoo, that's easy for me to describe.
Yeah.
But now if something appears in my vision that is incongruent with all that I know.
Yeah, you don't know how to put it.
Yeah, how do you grasp it at words?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you get these kind of like crazy sort of images, and very vivid ideas. Yeah.
Well, I would also say sometimes people, and in general, as evangelicals, we say we take the Bible literally. Well, if something's a metaphor and you treat it as a metaphor, you are taking the Bible literally.
Yeah.
And I think some people get lost in that.
100%.
Yeah.
And that's the point I'm trying to make, that sometimes understanding this is metaphor is the literal interpretation.
And so it's not that you're leaving a literal approach.
Yeah.
You're applying given principles of language.
Yeah. So the way I see chapters like say 6 to 18, So with the four horsemen all the way through to,
Right.
all the fall of Babylon and all these things and everything in between, I see it's telling one story. It's rescue and it's judgment.
Right.
And it's telling that story a bunch of different ways.
Right. It's giving preview.
Yeah.
And then it's
Yeah.
giving result, another preview.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So anyway, so chapter 14. So all that said,
Before you go on
Yeah.
to that, I think this is a great time. I think the to bring in about the metaphor here is I think it's well placed, and to
explain
remind
that.
and to remind people about how this works in the book of
Yeah.
Revelation.
I hope it'll be helpful. Number one, I don't want to burn too much time on the clock there because you could really could really lose a lot of time.
Yeah.
And the other thing is I don't want people to think this is like a seminary classroom now. That I don't generally enjoy that in
Right.
terms of pulpit work, right?
Right.
But I do think people appreciate handles.
Yeah.
For how to look. So we get to chapter 14 and our perspective has shifted back to heaven at the beginning of the chapter, right? And so there's been this vacillating back and forth between what's going on the earth with judgment and so forth, and then what's going on in heaven in the throne room and worship. And we see that kind of vacillating back and forth again today, even within the same chapter, because it starts kind of with this, another view of heaven, and then it ends with this idea of the judgment of the earth, or at least a metaphor describing the judgment of the earth. And I think, as we're reading these chapters and I see this kind of back and forth in terms of perspectives, it's to me, it's even more evidence that we really can't read Revelation sequentially or chronologically.
Mhm.
Cyclical.
Yeah. It's cyclical.
Spiral. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, in other words, it's not just like this, then this, then this, then
Right.
this.
Right.
It's a little bit back and forth,
Yeah.
right? It's jumping forward, it's jumping back.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
3 sections. So here's my outline. 3 big ideas today in 14. Number 1, a song of salvation. That's verses 1 through 5. Number 2, a series of angelic signs. That's the 3 angels. And 6 to 13. I put 11 there, but it's actually the 13.
Right.
And then number 3, a sharp sickle. And I think most of the sermon is going to be that third point. I'm going to try to really save enough time to go there because there's a great cross reference we'll look at. But the song of salvation, that's verses 1 through 5. Let me read it. Then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written in their foreheads. That's a throwback to one of the promises for endurance, right, of the 7 churches. And I heard a voice from heaven like the roar of many waters. We've seen that before in chapters 4 and 5, like the sound of thunder. And the voice I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps. Paul Major is going to love that
There
verse.
you
We have a harpist now, by the way, on Sundays here.
There you go.
Yeah, big old harp.
We're still waiting.
You're still waiting on the harp? Yeah. It's big old harp sitting right down on the floor. It's beautiful. And they were singing a new song. So that's kind of that message, a new song before the throne and the 4 living creatures before the elders. And no one could learn that song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed of the earth. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. It is these who followed the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been redeemed from mankind as first fruits for God and the Lamb. And in their mouth no lie was found, for they are blameless, right? And so, so how do we think about this new song? I think it's a fun idea to think like there are songs that are going to get saved that we're only going to sing in heaven. You know what I mean? Like with all the worship music that comes out, like, and I love a new worship song. Like when I hear a new song, I'm like, ooh, that's so good. We're singing a new one here called Echo Holy, which is really cool. It's a cool kind of throne room kind of song. And I love a new song, but think about that. There are songs we're going to sing that we're only going to sing in heaven. That's fun to think about, right? And so I think all of this language is symbolic. Like, so for me, Mount Zion is not like, like literal Jerusalem with like a new physically rebuilt temple in Jerusalem.
Right.
But I take that as Mount Zion in the Bible is talking about heaven, right? All through the Old Testament.
Right.
So that's symbolic for heaven. That's New Jerusalem. From chapter 21, G.K. Bill, the theologian, echoes that. He says it's the end time city where God dwells with and provides security for the remnant. And so I kind of got just three things here. What kind of song is this? It's a deafening song. It's a loud song, right? So think about the loudest concert you've ever been to.
Yeah.
You know, like that just kind of makes your ears burn. It's loud. It's but it's not loud in an unpleasant way. You know, it's beautiful. It's like thunder and roaring, you know, waterfall, right? It's a new song. In the Old Testament, you know, when they sing a new song, you think about Exodus 15, right? They come through the
Miriam.
Miriam. You come through the Red Sea and they sing a new song. Like anytime they sing a new song in the Old Testament, it's after victory,
right?
And so it's introducing this section we're going into. That's just reminding us that victory is coming, right? That final judgment and harvest is coming. And then I do think it's important to point out it's a song of the saints. Now, again, I've already shared that I believe the 144,000 and the 24 elders are the same thing,
right?
And that is, these are symbols for all Old Testament saints and all New Testament
People
saints.
of God, right?
Yeah, and then the whole bit about them being virgin and pure and so forth. Mm-hmm. That's just another way of saying, you know, they have the imputed righteousness of Christ. Yeah. It's kind of like the bright linens of the saints that we've already talked about. So these are believers, you know, in heaven. And I personally think this happens simultaneously, like this whole scene of like worshiping because we've been redeemed and saved. It happens simultaneously with judgment. Like I think these things are happening at the same time. That's how I see it. And so what's the application here about the song of salvation? You know, you know, and I think, you know, Chris preached this a lot early on, and it was just like, keep your eyes on heaven, right? Yeah. Like when all hell's breaking loose on earth, there's another place to look. There's a reality. There's a vision of where we're headed, right? And it's one of victory. So what do you guys have any thoughts, comments on the new song? You read anything interesting on that?
Well, the first verse, of course, it mentions again that the name of the Father was written on their foreheads. And again, these are those who are sealed. Again, the 144,000 mentioned back in chapter 7. One thing I have made the point, and I'll repeat the point. No one accidentally has the wrong mark. I mean, sometimes I read stuff and people think they're going to get a chip on their wrist, or they're going to accidentally get this or that, and then, oh no, I've been marked. This is a choice that people make, either to choose to follow the Lamb. And interestingly, verse 1, he is called the Lamb. So this is clearly the Lord who begins the chapter as the Lamb and ends the chapter as the victorious King. So we see him later in the chapter with a crown, the crown of victory, the Stephanos. So again, the Lord's depicted many different ways, but sovereign always.
I think it's good you brought up the marking on the forehead. So it's there's so much contrast in Revelation. Yeah. Right. So last week there was this idea of those that took the mark of the beast.
Exactly.
And then here we have those that have the mark of the Lamb, right? And so
your mark,
which, you know, and again, for me, it's more reason to interpret all of these things metaphorically, because here in this chapter, the mark on the forehead is metaphorical of belonging to God, of being his people, being sealed, being redeemed.
Exactly.
In the same way that I think the mark of the beast is also metaphorical of following in and buying the world system and following the face of evil and so forth. Justo.
Hebrews chapter 12, verse 22. But you have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to innumerable angels in festal gathering. And to assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to be sprinkled, to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel.
Wow. That's Hebrews 12.
Hebrews 12:22, yeah.
That's good.
And earlier, he talks about... for you have not come to what may be touched, a blazing fire and darkness and gloom and a tempest, and the sound of a trumpet and a voice whose words made the hearers beg that no further messages be spoken to them, for they could not endure the order that was given. If even a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned. Indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I tremble with fear. And then he goes on, but you have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God.
That's good. Yeah, you know, there's a lot of cross-referencing we can do right there with Mount Zion.
Wow.
And, you know, in the Psalms, and that's so good in Hebrews. I didn't think about that one. That one's so good.
But I would also point out the song, I think, is unique for the saints?
Yes.
Because I think there's a level of thanksgiving that comes from a level of forgiveness.
Amen.
I mean, the Bible never mentions that angels need a forgiveness. And
Right.
I think there's something about the redeemed because they know we know
Yeah.
what we were and whose we are.
Yeah.
And I think that may be the foundation of the new song.
It's definitely unique to the saints, right?
Yeah.
Nobody else gets it. I thought another little simple application there is, like even now and today, like the world doesn't understand. Like when we gather in worship and and we pour out our heart to God, like the world doesn't get it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we see here. Okay, so that's the Song of Salvation, the new song. Second section is a series of angelic signs. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. That's verses 6 through 13.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to read that all. Interestingly enough, Roger, he actually tied this section to last week, because there's the whole bit about the mark of the beast and what the third angel here is saying about, don't take the mark of the beast and the call for endurance of the saints. So Roger actually fast forwarded and jumped on the three angels last week here. So I don't have to spend a lot of time on this one here.
Yeah.
I don't know what you guys are going to do with it, but just to outline them, of course, the first angel proclaims the gospel, to every nation, which, by the way, I take that.
Mm-hmm.
I take that as a really cool exclamation point on this promise that Jesus made in the Olivet Discourse, that the gospel will be preached in all the nations, and then the end will come. Yeah. And just in case anybody missed it, here's an angel flying through the earth proclaiming the gospel. It's like it leaves you with this idea that no one is with excuse.
Yeah.
Right. Like everyone is without excuse.
Wow.
So that's the first angel. Second angel announces this idea of the fall of Babylon. Now, I'm not going to get into that because we're going to spend 2 whole chapters on that, right?
Yeah.
Who's preaching 17 and 18? I guess
I think I am.
You guys probably are.
Yeah.
So you're going to deal with Babylon later.
Yeah.
It's spiritual adultery, that whole thing, right? So I'm not going to really get into that. And then the third angel, this is kind of what goes back to where we were last week with the mark of the beast and so forth. It's this rally cry for endurance of the saints, right? Like God's wrath is coming. Hold on to the end. Don't buy into the beast and the false prophet and those world systems of evil opposing themselves against God. Don't metaphorically take that mark. And I love verse 12 because it's a direct repeat of where we were last week. Here's a call for endurance of the saints.
Yeah.
This is one of those verses that leads me to believe the church is here during the tribulation.
Right.
So of course this will be a post-tribulation rapture view. And there's quite a few of these like messages of like, hang on,
right,
endure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so for me, that places the saints here for that. That's my view. Anything on the three angels?
I was going to point out verse 7 again reminds us, because the hour of his judgment has come. And I've tried to make the point repeatedly, it will be too late. And that's one of my reasons I don't necessarily accept other timelines that seem to give a second chance. Okay, this is going to happen, and this is going to get your attention.
The hour.
Right. Then later you can come to faith. Of course, there's a huge church that believes you can go to a place of cleansing, purging, and then make your way. I think it's just is imperative that we teach that there is a moment that is too late. And that moment may be your death. Mm-hmm. But if you survive, that moment will be the return. Mm-hmm. And so people are playing with fire, literally, if they don't take to heart.
Yeah. The hour of his judgment has come, which is where we're going in verse 14. I agree with you. I personally, I start to get, I don't know what the right word is. I get nervous. I get confused. I get uncomfortable with eschatological positions that sort of have to introduce kind of a different soteriology,
right, or
a different missiology than what we've had in the church age. Because it seems to me that, exactly like you're saying, like it's called the day of the Lord. It's called the hour of judgment. It's something that happens suddenly, it happens surprisingly, and it happens permanently, which is kind of where we're going at the end here with the last section. That's the sharp sickle. So that's verses 14 to 20. I guess I'll go ahead and read this. Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud seated on the cloud, one like the Son of Man with golden crowns on his head and with a sharp sickle in his hand. So Mark, you've already identified this as none other but Jesus, right? I think it's pretty hard to miss that one. And another angel came out of the temple, called with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, put in your sickle and reap, for the hour has come, and the harvest of the earth is fully ripe. So the angels are eager for this culminating moment in history. He who sat on the cloud swung his sickle across the earth, and the earth was reaped. Again, metaphor, right? Symbolism. Then another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar, and the angel who has authority over the fire, and he called with a loud voice to the one who had the sharp sickle, put in your sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, for its grapes are ripe. So the angel swung his sickle across the earth and gathered the grape harvest of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of God's wrath. So it's I love it when it interprets the symbolism for us.
There you go.
Like what is
easy.
all this wrath or this winepress business about? It's about wrath, right? Yeah. The wrath of God, and the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood flowed from the winepress as high as the horse's bridle. So, obviously very, very profound picture of judgment there, right? And so this has its root, this idea of the harvest and the sickle, it has its roots in Joel 3. Right. So I'll briefly read those couple of verses, Joel 3, 13 and 14. I think it'd be helpful to throw a picture of a sickle up on the screen.
Yeah, this generation not sure what that is.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of sickles because where we work in East Africa, they don't have tractors, and so they're actually.
I'm obviously older than you, but I had a job where I used a sickle.
Really?
When I was in high school.
Was it like the old weed whackers, like the manual weed whacker kind of thing?
No. And it wasn't the curved one. It was the straight one. But I worked for, I'll say, apartment maintenance. Okay. And there were some old lower income apartments, and they hadn't been mowed in like 6 or 8 months. And so my best friend and I literally with the sickle had to do about 2 hours work.
Yeah.
And that is exhausting.
Hard work.
It's very hard work.
How long is it going to take Jesus to harvest the whole earth?
Yeah.
And so here's the cool thing about this one. This is actually going to be my favorite part of the sermon. Turn to Matthew 13. Because the good thing about this one is, if you guys remember this passage, like we don't have to guess or wonder or speculate at all on this one, because Jesus gives us a parable that literally spells this out. He tells us exactly what the symbolism means. So this is, by the way, one of what we call the kingdom parables, right? And so this is when his kingdom comes. So this is Matthew 13, 24 to 30. So this is one of those deals where you have the parable and then a little section down, you have the symbolism of the parable or the interpretation of the parable. Yeah. So verse 24, he put a parable before them saying, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while his men were sleeping, the enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. So when the plants came up and bore, then you had weeds also appearing. And the servants of the master of the house came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Why does it have weeds? And he said to them, an enemy must have done this. So the servant said to him, then do you want us to go and gather them? Now this is really interesting. But he said, no, lest in gathering the weeds, you root up the wheat along with them. Let them both grow together until the harvest. And at the harvest time, I will tell the who? The reapers. There we go. Revelation 14. Yep. Gather the weeds first, bind them into bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat in my barn. So really clear picture here, right? Of like, I think that's a picture of the church age, right? You have believers, you have non-believers. Yeah. And Roger did a great job of this a few weeks ago. He talked about kind of the old question of like, why is it taking so long for Jesus to come back? Well, he's good and kind and patient, and he's giving time for the harvest. We're still going out. I mean, what did Jesus say? The harvest is plentiful. We need more workers, right? Yeah. And then skip down to verse 36. And here he gives the interpretation. Then the crowds left him and went into the house, and his disciples came to him and said, explain the parable of the weeds of the field. Like, okay, what do you really mean by that, Jesus, right? And I think this is so helpful as we look at Revelation 14. He answered and said, the one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed is the sons of the kingdom, and the weeds are the sons of the evil one, right? So we got those following this false trinity, right? The satanic trinity, and you got those following the lamb. The enemy who sowed them is the devil. That's the red dragon, right? The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. What does Revelation 14 say?
There you go.
These angels are reaping. So this is so explicitly clear. Just as the weeds are gathered and burned with fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels. They will gather out of his kingdom all causes of sin and lawbreakers and throw them into the fiery furnace. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun. I think that's 1 Corinthians 15 when we're changed, right? When incorruption or when corruption puts on incorruption, right? And shine like the sun in the kingdom of the Father. He who has ears to let him hear. So for me, this mystery is very simple, right? Because Jesus tells us what he meant by it, that the time for harvest is coming. Only God knows the time. But I'll talk about the fact that, there's two harvests here. There's the harvest of the righteous, right? We rise to meet him in the air. I think that's the rapture. That's the marriage supper of the Lamb. And then there's the harvest of the unrighteous. I think that's all the judgment, right? The seals, the bowls, all of that. And then they are cast away into everlasting fire. And so the takeaway message is be ready for the harvest, right? So what do you guys got on that section?
Yeah, and I'd say there are two pictures. Back in verse 10, it references fire and brimstone, which I think is about a dozen times in the New Testament. And then the latter picture is the wine press. Of course, the famous book, Grapes of Wrath, got its title from this passage. The Battle Hymn of the Republic. There's the famous verse. I'll misquote it. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored.
Right.
He has loosed the faithful lightning with his terrible swift sword. But literally the imagery has crossed, and that was written right before the Civil War.
Eschatology hymn.
So there you go.
Yeah.
And again, it reminds us of an American past. Even if you watch old shows, Downton Abbey's not American, but how many references you have to Scripture that today people wouldn't get?
Nope.
Because it's just not in the culture.
That's that historical. Like, you got to understand the historical context. Couple of illustrations. Like, if you want to illustrate the idea of the harvest is it's sudden, it's full, it's permanent, and it has a time in it. So my family in Australia, they do alfalfa. And the thing about baling alfalfa is you can only bale alfalfa when the moisture is just right. So they'll literally go out in the fields at about dark with the tractors, and they're sitting there waiting ready, and they wait. They got a little measuring deal. They wait until the dew starts to set and the moisture content is just right. And then the second it's right, they work like crazy to get that hay in all night long. And so it's like, that's the way it's going to be. Yeah. Right. Like, when it's time, it's time. Yeah.
Because interestingly, the actual Greek word, when it talks about being ripe, is actually literally dried. And so it's kind of the opposite, not the dew point, but when it's dry, it's
dry,
it's ready for harvest. Yeah.
That's interesting. I'm sure there are types of hay that need that. Yeah. Another idea I had, tell me if you think this is, off subject or not, but I think there's an apologetic sort of opportunity here. For anybody who is skeptical of this idea that, like, there's a judgment day coming, or there's like an end of the world, for anybody that like thinks that is sort of, fairy tale or nonsense or something to that effect. It's very interesting to me that science now, like, no cosmologist anymore dispute or argue this. Like, science has confirmed with overwhelming consensus that we live in a finite universe, that it began suddenly and surprisingly from a singular point in the distant past, and that it is running out of energy, almost like a flashlight, sort of running out of batteries, and that there reaches a point where it collapses upon itself, essentially. It's no more. So science sees a definite point in the future at some point where the universe as we know it is done. Yeah. And experiences some sort of a rebirth. So I think that's very interesting. Sure. That even in science now, there's this idea that the clock runs out.
Yeah. And actually we get to the place where it talks about a new heaven and a new earth.
Exactly.
we know where we're headed.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's what I got.
I came across one commentator. I thought he made a good point that the harvest and the vintage are two different pictures. The harvest, and you mentioned this, that it's two. That the first harvest is that of believers.
It's a harvest of the righteous,
right.
Then a harvest
and
of the
then
unrighteous.
The vintage was, and you have wheat and you have grapes. And
Yeah.
so it's a different picture of the wine press.
Yeah.
I did look it up, and I tried to do the math there with the one.
Oh, the stadia
was
thing?
it 1,600 stadia? I think my translation is 200 miles. And I figured someone had done it, so I looked it up. And if you look at the average person, how much blood, it'd be 84 trillion people would have to die, literally, to have the blood go for 200 miles up to the bridle, which is virtually 5 feet. Again,
I don't think we get to 84 trillion.
No, I believe it helps
More
us with
reason
the
that
symbolic.
this is metaphor.
Yeah, I think it's a good reminder that we're not necessarily talking about literal lake of blood, but a picture of massive rebellion and judgment.
Yeah. A severe judgment. Yeah. So I think that where I'm going to land on is just a very evangelistic appeal of like, hey, listen, the clock. There's still time on the clock right now.
Yeah. And even
come
the picture
to Christ today.
The grapes are ripe. To me, that's a reminder. God is setting the system, and there's still time. Mm-hmm. Right now, there's time, and we don't know if tomorrow there's time.
That's right.
We don't know when the grapes.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where
ripe.
I ended and do like a probably a somewhat traditional, formal, you know, evangelistic invitation. So.
Yeah. The points I came down to are the glimpse of the final song of redemption, a glimpse of the final chance to repent. That's when the angel is announcing, and then a glimpse of the final reaping. And just this week, I came across a story that I'll probably include, that there's a guy on death row in South Carolina, Richard Moore is his name. Mm-hmm. And just yesterday, or the day before, he was presented with 3 options. He can choose his death. He can choose electric chair, which is the default. If he doesn't choose, that's what happens. Injection or firing squad. And he has till the 18th to determine how he wants to die. And then November 1st, it will be the execution day. Wow. And to me, it's almost like God has given us in Revelation 14, here's your October 18th. Here's your time.
Wait, hold on. Are you going to announce the date of the second coming? Is that where you're going?
It's actually November 1st, because then I don't have to get the next sermon ready after that. Oh man! But it just hit me. This guy knows he's going to die. Yep. I want to, with all the kindness I can muster, tell people, if you haven't been sealed by the Lord, and that's your choice. I mean, I believe it's His sovereign choice. I believe it's your free will choice at the same time. Sure. That by rejecting His seal, you're embracing the seal of the evil one. Yeah. And the only outcome is judgment. Yeah. There's no other third option.
That's good. That's good. Yeah. All right. We'll leave it at that, guys. Good stuff. Next week, tune in for more, right?
All right.